Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube with a crazy URL, so just search for Virtual Memories Show. Now you can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSPod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Now, despite my anxiety over what promises to be a absolutely crazy month ahead, I actually had a pretty easy Labor Day weekend. I got some good news Friday morning going into the weekend regarding this negotiation I've been fighting about for 5 months now, and that really lightened my mood a bit because it lessened some of the crazy stuff that's going to happen later this month. I will admit, fighting is probably the wrong term to use regarding a negotiation, but pulling teeth, which would have been more accurate, would probably also sound worse. Anyway, what happened is I got a concession that my side seems to be happy with, so that's good. So that means the long weekend was not spent worrying. I mean, it's always spent worrying, you know me. But most of it was spent reading, cleaning up my office and library, and taking Bendico the Greyhound on some nice long walks. I also made some interesting podcast pitches. I'll let you know how those pan out. Now, this week's show did not require much pitching at all. My guest is Kathy Bidus. I've known Kathy for a couple of years now through her husband, the great artist and past podcast, Drew Friedman. And I've always enjoyed just shooting the breeze with Kathy while Drew does book signings or sells art prints when we meet up during festivals. The thing is, during the reception for Drew's most recent book at the Society of Illustrators last spring, I sat down with Kathy and shot the breeze for a while. It was really the first extended conversation we'd had. And I asked her more about her non-Drew life. And as it turns out, she's a published poet, literary background, and she had a piece coming out in an upcoming book. That book is out now. It's called Sister, Writer, Eaters, all one word, from Griffith Moon Press. It's got essays and recipes from a ton of contributors, including a few of our past podcasts, Meryl Marco and Liza Donnelly. The essays are a lot of fun. It's a really delightful book. I can't vouch for the recipes because I'm a male stereotype, but they look awfully good. Anyway, so I was happy that it turned out there was a peg for me and Kathy to sit down and record a podcast, which I'd wanted to do for quite a while. So I drove out to Drew and Kathy's place, recorded a conversation about the book, her literary past, how she came to New York in the 80s and what it was like, how she deals with marriage to the Vermeer or the Borscht Belt, and more. My only caveat is, and this is going to be a weird one, Kathy was kind of shy on mic, more so than, or she's not shy at all when we just talk, but for some people the microphone kind of creates a weird dynamic, and it sort of seemed to do that in this case. And that led to me doing a lot of talking this episode, so be warned. Here's Kathy's bio from the contributor notes to Sister, Writer, Eaters. Kathy Bidus was born and raised in Philadelphia and attended Kutztown University before moving to New York City, where she met her husband, artist Drew Friedman. Bidus is a published poet and, in collaboration with Friedman, has written illustrated humor pieces for The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, and The New York Observer, among many others. For the last 20 years, she has raised champion show beagles. She currently resides in rural Pennsylvania with Drew. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Kathy Bidus. So, Sister Writer Eaters.
Yes.
What is it and how'd you get involved in it?
That was really the brainchild of Anne Brown and Claire Lezebnik, who were the editors. And I think they'd been wanting to collaborate on something for a really long time. And then they just decided to get their friends involved. And I think it started really as a Facebook group where they talked about food and traded recipes. And then they were like, why don't we just turn this into a book? So that's how it happened. And Claire approached me because I've known Claire for a while because her sister Nell Scovell, the brilliant humorist, is one of my best friends. I've known her for like 30 years.
So there you go, having friends, not like me.
Did you know Claire and Nell were sisters?
No, I didn't.
No.
I know Nell's name and I've known some of her work, but how did you connect with her?
With Nell?
Yeah.
She was working at Spy Magazine when Drew started with the Private Lives of Public Figures. And Nell was there, and Eddie Gordetsky was a mutual friend. Do you know Eddie?
Nope.
And he just said one day, "You're going to love my friend Nell." And he brought us together, and we really hit it off. And then she moved to L.A., like instantly.
Just as far away from you
as soon as we became best friends.
Had you ever been interested in L.A.?
No. To live there? No.
Yeah.
I think you really have to be connected to the industry to live in L.A. And enjoy it and not go broke.
My only experiences with the city are 36 to 72 hours at a time, usually before a trade show in San Diego or right after. So I fly in. All I do is interview interesting people and drive. And then I go to San Diego and talk about like biotech and pharma. And then I come home. And so my LA is so weird, I think, compared to normal. Like everybody I meet is interesting because it's all artists and people who work at In-N-Out Burger.
Oh, there are great people there.
Yeah.
I mean, we have tons of friends. I probably have more friends in LA than I have on the entire East Coast.
Yeah.
But
again, because they all had to get away from me. I'm just kidding.
Well, what happened was they were all really bright people, brilliant people, and they went into the entertainment industry, and that's where you move when you go into the entertainment industry.
So tell me what brought you to New York. The essay you write for Sister Writer Eaters involves your arriving in New York in the late 70s.
Yeah, I was
and
going to...
And then you have a Jean Valjean moment in it, but it's a neat...
Is that considered thievery? I don't
Slightly,
think so. Survival.
Yeah. But tell me about your what brought you to New York initially? Who were you?
I was going to college, and my boyfriend at the time was Stephen Croninger, the brilliant collage artist. And he was dying to move to New York. I mean, I think his whole life, that's what he wanted to do. He was from a small town in Pennsylvania, and his dad owned the private garbage pickup business.
We call it waste management here
management,
in New Jersey,
you.
where I'm from. Yeah, it tends to have some connotations too. But go on.
I didn't mean to say garbage man.
Yeah.
I'm chagrined.
Well, it's either that or mobster in terms of New Jersey. But
so he really desperately wanted to move to New York. So we did. We just, like adventurous children, just picked up and moved one day, and no plan, just too young to know any better, I guess. And that's how I ended up in New York.
And where were you studying?
I had been studying literature, and Stephen was an artist, and his family wanted him to take over the waste management business, and we moved to New York instead. And now he has work hanging in the Museum of Modern Art, and he could have been the garbage man of Warfield, Pennsylvania.
It's a balancing act. So, where'd you go to school? Where were you studying?
Kutztown University.
Okay. So nearby here?
It's it's Berks County, Pennsylvania. It's sort of mid PA.
So what did New York mean to you? Do you remember what it was?
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia, so I was kind of used to a city atmosphere, but I totally fell in love with the Village. The West Village was so community-oriented back then, and so much fun, and it kind of looks like Philadelphia a little bit with the red brick buildings and that type of thing. It looks like Pine Street in Philly. The last time I visited down in Pine Street, I was like, no wonder I like the Village so much. It looks just like Pine Street. So it was friendly, considering the hardship that we kind of dealt with at the time. It was really a friendly town.
And there's something about being an age being in your 20s.
You're immune.
Yeah, I've got a friend who's now a writer in Hollywood. I went to high school with, and she did the paying her dues in New York, and this would have been 90s era. But in your 20s, you can put up with a lot of crap.
Yeah, I was 19.
Ooh, geez. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you finish college, or had
No,
you
2 years.
bailed to go? Okay. And you were a literature person. You don't really, you can learn literature anywhere.
You just read.
Yeah, if somebody else tells you about a book, that's pretty much professorship. I find. But
Yeah.
I spent 4 years spinning wheels before getting a decent education in a graduate program that was a little more focused. But yeah, I've just been reading compulsively.
And as we
all
were
this
just
time.
talking about, at the time I moved to New York, 4th Avenue was just a strip of secondhand bookstores. So, talk about classical education. You could walk in with $1 and get Thackeray.
Yeah. Yeah. What was your area of study in literature? Did you
English
have a focus
literature.
at that point?
Yeah.
Were you a reading nerd as a kid?
Yes. The whole family is.
So what brought you into the strange world of art and comics?
Art and comics.
I mean, you had the Croninger connection.
Right.
How did that sort of proliferate into?
Well, I had always written poetry. Mm-hmm. And I was, at the time I moved to New York even, I was being published as a poet, very, young and through my 20s and 30s. And then when I met Drew, it just became really natural to sort of use I like to play with words. And it sort of became very natural to start playing with words with his art. And he's really fun to work with because he can draw anything. So you can have a concept of the slightest, most subtle gesture or expression, and he can pull it off. So it makes it all funnier.
Had you had any art comics background at all?
I can't draw to say.
Oh, no, I just mean in terms of reading. Like, were you exposed to this stuff?
No, actually, I was forbidden
world?
to read it
Really?
when I was a kid. Yeah, a Mad magazine was in the house, but my brother used to sneak it to me when I was sick in bed as a kid because that was guy stuff. It wasn't for young ladies. Now I sound like I'm really old.
No. Trust me. I have guests who are far younger than me who talk about the same sort of thing. That there's always been no, you don't get this is for your brother.
Right, exactly. There was one brother, 3 girls, and that was for him.
Do you remember any of it particularly warping your sensibility?
Oh, Al Jaffe raised me snappy answers to stupid questions. Are you kidding me? When I finally met Al, I told him that he was a huge influence on me.
Well, I met him at one of Drew's things a few months ago, and a guy behind me was like, is that Al Jaffe? His work means so much to me. I'm like, why are you not telling him that now? He's 96 years old. Yeah. I know he's heard it a million times, but he still gets a charge out of that. Trust me.
He does.
Yeah.
He does.
And he actually told me to wait a few months before we record. I pitched him for this summer, and it's like, September, October, I'll have more time.
It's possible they travel.
Yeah. And I just figured in your mid-90s, if you feel like you got a few more months to wait on something, that's more power.
Last time I saw him was at the Society of Illustrators.
Yeah.
And as I was walking up the street, he was walking down, and he stopped to hold the door for a bunch of people who were going in. I love that.
It's just amazing. Was it a weird thing for you to start meeting people whose work you idolized like that? And do you have literary versions of that too? Basically,
I'm shy.
Yeah.
But Drew, growing up how he grew up with celebrities in the home, is not shy that way. So it sort of makes me feel a little more comfortable. Mm-hmm.
You ever get tongue-tied around
Always. I'm always tongue-tied.
Okay. You're doing fine now, for God's sake. Now, in terms of reading, were there particular writers you were unduly influenced by as a youth? Were there books that were really, or poets who were really annihilating you?
Poetry was just part of our childhood, really. I mean, A Child's Garden of Verses was next to my bed growing up, and we had some kind of weird old tome that was really thick and had like really old-fashioned poetry in it. I don't know if it was my mom's when she was little or what, and that was there by the bed too. So that was just always part of my life. And my dad was a big fan of music. So lyrics also really influenced me. And then my brother picked up his love of music, and there was always music playing in the house, always songs. Mm-hmm. So I think listening to lyrics really helped me a lot with using words.
Have you done any songwriting at all?
I write, like, Frank Jacobs of Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
I've done, like, song parodies just to torment friends and things like that. But no serious musical writing, no.
I just wonder, being a guy who has no creative outlet but this.
Just really rude things.
You guys. So tell me about meeting Drew.
I met Drew through Mark Newgarden.
Yeah.
Do you know Mark?
Yeah. Yeah, we're supposed to record this fall when his Nancy book finally. Yeah. Yeah.
So he was a mutual friend. Mm-hmm. He was friends with Croninger and I. And we all went to Drew's first book party in 1986. And that's where I met him. Mm-hmm.
You remember thinking at the time, oh, my God, that's the most obnoxious person in the world. I won't spend another minute with him?
He was nice.
Okay. No, I haven't bet Josh. I'm just kidding.
No, I remember thinking how handsome his father was.
His father was a good-looking man.
Striking.
I show my wife pictures. She's like, God damn, he was Did I tell you, by the way, the great moment with Bruce when I recorded with him back in 2014? And I asked him, because we were looking at a shelf of his books and a shelf of his son's books, including his youngest son, Kip, who just had his first book out. And I said, what means more to you? Yours up there or the fact that your sons now have a shelf of books out there? And he just thumped his chest. And he said, mine. Without mine, they don't have theirs. And I thought, that's pretty much what I expected out of you. But
that's great.
Yeah, entirely expected.
It's about right.
Yeah. There's really no shade of that. So tell me about 80s New York. What was the world like for you at that point? What did you start doing, find yourself doing, and then, nothing that's going to imply that you were doing anything criminal.
Which I did not.
How did you find yourself in New York City? I mean, as a person?
We went to New York, and I guess the line of business was to find a place to live and a means of making a living. I actually worked for Bark Frameworks. That was my first job in New York. Do you know that?
No.
Oh, okay. They framed for galleries and collectors. And I met a lot of interesting people through that job. But it didn't last very long. I think I was there 2 years, maybe. But it was interesting. And
then moved into the...
I actually went to work for... This is a long story because I worked for her for a long time. A woman who had started an imprinted sportswear company and made custom printed things for universities, Disneyland, Disney World, that type of thing. And I worked with her for a very long time. We're still friends.
And had this overlap in the art world?
It does, in a way.
Yeah.
She actually did some political T-shirts that went to Macy's, that were sold by Macy's for the Carter campaign that Stephen did the illustrations for. So there was some overlap there. Yeah. And we did sportswear for a Spike Lee film. Help me with that one.
First one was She's Gotta Have It. The second one was...
What's the one that's like a university?
Oh, yeah. It's the first movie I ever walked out of. The one that's sort of a musical. Gosh darn it, I can't remember now. But, suffice to say, I walked out of it. But yeah, it was the dark skin and the light skin sororities and
I don't even remember if I've seen it.
Yeah, I saw it in college.
At the end, there's a band sequence.
Well, again, the end, who knows?
And they're wearing our sweatshirts, so now you have to watch it through.
I'll have to go back, Although in this world now I can fast forward to the right spot and I'm all good. But I only ask because the 80s New York, the last great messed up interview I had about that was with Karen Green, who started off with a story about trading notes with Mimi Pond until they found somebody they had both slept with back in the 80s.
I was there.
Okay, I was going to ask without, again, implying anything crazy.
And I rudely interjected Wayne White,
for
which Mimi almost killed me.
Elaborate, please.
Yeah. I actually knew Mimi back in, I'm very bad with years.
Yeah,
so
just say
I'm
the
just
80s.
going to say the early 80s because the first year Stephen and I moved to New York, we met Philip Burke. And Philip was already being published. We had seen his work in the Village Voice before we even went to New York. And we ran into him in the Unsloppy Copy Shop. A lot of artists used to go and copy their work for their portfolios. And Stephen recognized the piece of work he was copying and knew that it was him. And we thought he was an older gentleman. And he was our age. So Stephen and he became very tight friends. And Philip had this idea of the old salon, where all artists and writers would get together.
Yeah, I used to do something called Smart Guys Salon, where I just get a whole bunch of
smart guys,
too smart for their own good, and we meet at like the WWF restaurant in Times Square, and just shoot the breeze.
Any
for a
girls?
While. Yeah, one or two. Smart Guys is just a euphemism. We tried to invite women.
It wasn't like the Women Haters Club.
Yeah, He-Man Women Haters Club. No. But thanks for the first Little Rascals reference of the afternoon.
There will be more.
I figured.
It's Joe Besser's birthday, right?
Oh, no, this is great. Okay, well, look at, I'm sure when we have lunch with Drew later on.
We'll run the stinky reel for you later.
But Philip had the idea for...
So Philip wanted to get everybody together, and it was a great group. It was Mimi Pond, Ron Hauge, Stephen, Philip. I'm sure I'm going to leave out people and remember later and want to kill myself. I think Mark Marek. Just a lot of people.
Oh, God, I pitched him recently.
Really
I haven't heard anything.
Yeah. And they were really happening. And Philip would even find these spaces where we would go and you could draw on the wall or write something or whatever you wanted to do. And that was kind of exciting. But Philip left New York City around 83, 84. So that only lasted that long, 4 years or whatever that we knew him. And he moved back to Buffalo.
I tend to find that's the best. It's like doing this show. The longer, more exposure you have with people, the more disappointing you become to them. So I figure it's probably for the best that these things, have a little proliferation.
I don't really know what you mean. I've been married for 28 years.
Oh, for people who are legally bound to you, that's different. But, as far as the show goes, you'll never realize how really shallow I am if we only spend like an hour or so together.
We're going to keep it light.
Yeah, okay. If we ended up getting together every couple of weeks and talking, you'd think, God, Gil has nothing to say.
There were a couple of those in the group.
That's what I'm saying. The longer those things go on, you realize, wow, that artist seems so interesting, but in fact has really nothing going on.
It was one guy. Well, I won't divulge.
Living or dead?
I think he's still around, though I wouldn't know where he is.
Yeah. So nobody who's renowned enough that we'd be,
No,
okay.
no. The famous ones remained interesting.
Oh, but your Mimi connection did not involve the maitre d' that she and Karen both.
No,
good.
No.
Okay,
I was there when they made the discovery.
Oh, okay, that's great.
Both had the same gentleman the same summer, I think.
Probably. But yeah, it was one of those things where I told Karen, don't worry, I'll take that out of the episode. She's like, I don't care, leave it in. I'm like, even better.
They announced it to the whole restaurant.
Yeah, but that's different than putting it out for posterity on tape, which I'm fine with. And again, Mimi, I figure.
Is it in Mimi's book? I didn't get the new
I haven't
sequel.
seen the new one yet. I think
Okay.
I don't know if it ends with her heading towards New York or if that happens partway through, but we're recording sometime in September, either in New York or Columbus, Ohio, which is very different than New York, but yeah, cartooning festival out there.
Oh.
So, I've got to figure out good times to connect with certain artists.
So she's
and
going to
writers.
come halfway.
Well, she's doing a thing with Todd Oldham in the city early September, and then she'll be in Columbus for this festival that Tom Spurgeon puts on. So I figured, okay, I'll go out there and
I didn't know anything about that.
Oh, yeah, it's Cartoon Crossroads Columbus. It's in its third year.
Oh.
First year, they had me interview people as part of the programming. I did 4 and 5 hours with a bad head cold and managed to pull it off, which my wife just marvels over because she got the head cold a few days later. And she's like,
how did you do
how did you even make a sentence, much less talk to 4 different people, interestingly, for 5 hours? One of whom was Francoise Mouly, which you don't have to do too much. It's just, so how are you doing today? And she can go on pretty well. But, so Columbus is kind of interesting as far as building a cartooning festival goes and seeing what goes into it and the sort of guests you can bring in to somewhere like that, which is always continuing.
It's not easy to make a go of those things, really.
No, I'm doing an event for the trade association that I run right now, and it's only going to be 50 to 100 people, and even there, the logistics of just putting together a 2-day thing in a hotel is running me into the ground, which is why it's great to come out here on a Saturday and sit down with you, even with all the driving and all that stuff. But dealing with cartoonists, you deal with people in different directions in life and different careers. Do the cartoonists and artists strike you in any particular socially maladroit way? We've mentioned Drew in the past as, we'll say, cast you as both a muse and the person who makes sure he can actually function. So, do other artists come off as kind of needing a little help to tie their shoes and be able to function?
Well,
or
they have their mind on other things.
Yeah, okay, we'll be charitable about it.
But I find a lot of humor with artists and illustrators. I think that it's a lot of our friends are also writers.
Yeah.
Because you have that, that sort of verbal connection. It's the communication that people, they're adroit at that. You said maladroit, but it's fun to communicate with people who are talented that way.
Yeah, what contemporary writers, do you have much of a social scene out here where you are? We're in the woods. I'm in the woods in northern New Jersey, so it's not like I'm in some privileged position. I'm just closer to New York City. Out here, it's nice and isolated.
We actually just, not too long ago, can't remember exactly when, maybe a year ago or so, discovered that Brian Ajar, the illustrator, lives like 5 minutes from here. And we struck up a friendship with he and his wife, Pam, and it's been very enjoyable. But other than that, we don't really have a lot of friends.
Yeah, what brought you out here?
We had decided we wanted to have a house. New York, it was during the Dinkins era, and we lived in the East Village, which was basically on fire every night.
Yeah.
And we had been evacuated from our apartment several times, and it was getting really scary. There were a lot of fires there from the people using the vacant apartments as crack houses and such. And it was really getting a little disheartening to try to make it go. We actually looked to buy an apartment in New York, but it just wasn't that great for the price point that we had. And we looked around New York State, and Drew kept saying, I don't really want to live in Pennsylvania. I think he thought it was farmland, that he didn't really envision, woods and creeks and things like that. We looked around and we found Milford, Pennsylvania, which is a really nice little town. And that's where we started out. We started with a house up there.
And then moved to
We moved here because he thought it was a little more civilized. We were really in the woods up there.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if this is more or less rural.
No, we were like in a log house at the end of a road in the woods with no other houses there and such, so...
Did artists or your friends come out at all?
Once.
And that's what I'm wondering. Did they come out there and I am never coming back here again?
Once or twice.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's and again, out where I live, it's my local library. I pitched on, I could do a live podcast every quarter or so, and we'll have a little audience here. I'll play up the library, etc. That turned into who am I going to get from New York who could travel out to 25 miles from the city to
But you're not that far.
25 miles.
Well,
from
the funny
bridge.
thing about people hear Pennsylvania and they think you're in the Midwest.
Oh yeah.
Like to go from New York to Pennsylvania, but we do it all the time.
Yeah.
And it's funny when people start, like friends of mine are looking to move out of New York, and they'll look 3 hours, 4 hours up in New York State.
New York State. Yeah.
Because it still says New York on their mailing address, but they won't come. How long did it take you to get here today? An hour and 20 minutes?
Yeah.
They won't come 80 miles to Pennsylvania. It's so funny.
It could be a political thing. Maybe they just think it's coal country. Like anything west of New Jersey must be,
Were you a red state last time?
I think you did. You flipped.
That's
that's probably part of it.
That's the problem.
Again, in New Jersey, we've got our stereotypes to live up to. But
Right.
How often do you get into New York?
Fairly often. I'd say once a month or more. Drew likes to have like a reason, like to see friends or an event or something like that.
Although the first time we met, the first time we got together to record, you were in town for a dog event at the Javits Center. He called me that morning and said, I'm going to be in town with my wife. She's going to a dog thing at the Javits. Meet me at the 2nd Avenue Deli and we'll record.
Right.
And
I was actually one of the Beagle people at the AKC Meet the Breeds because I used to raise champion beagles.
Dish, tell us about the beagles.
Great little dogs. What do you want to know? We did. Had some champion beagles. I did it I showed show dogs for about 20 years.
Mm-hmm. How'd you get into that?
I wanted a beagle, and I got one that was very ill-bred. That was not, and had a lot of problems, and it was sad, really. And I decided I would get another beagle, but I started going to dog shows to find a breeder because I didn't want to get one from a backyard breeder. I wanted to find the right way to go, the right road to go down on that. And got a nice little female. And the beagle people were so friendly and so encouraging that I actually started to show the dog and got into it like that.
Yeah.
You learn a lot.
I'm a greyhound guy. What attracted you to beagles?
They're so cute. What do you think?
I just don't know, because we've got a neighbor with two of them that they basically try to figure out ways to get through the electric fence to go after.
To kill your greyhounds?
Yeah. And it's one of those like, okay, we can hear them at least a quarter mile away barking at different times, because they just, once they pick something up, the two of them, they syncopate the barking back and forth. Each one goes one after another. You can also see them jumping into the window as you walk by the house, which is great, but
They have a high prey drive.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I'm surprised they don't take the hit from the electric fence to get at what they want to get.
Yeah.
Because we don't really recommend an electric fence for beagles. They really need a physical barrier.
Right. I notice. And you're between dogs at present.
We had an old rescue beagle named Darla. And she just had a lot of physical problems, and she was very old. Right. And finally she couldn't walk, so we lost her a few months ago.
Are you thinking of another one?
It's lonely.
I will tell you the Patrick McDonald story, the guy who did the Mutts.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if you interacted with him back in the 80s, because he was part of that whole comics.
Well, I was good friends with Jay Kennedy.
Okay, so
a jeweler.
And the whole syndication thing. We lost our last one in December of last year, our last greyhound, and around 2 months after that, I recorded with Patrick down in Princeton, and he had the dog who inspired Earl from Mutts for 19 years. Wow. And I asked him, how long do you wait? And he said, well, when Earl died, I said, I just can't do it. My wife was on Pet Finder the next day, he said. And I said, no, can't do it. Waited a year and a half.
Wow.
The day after we got Emily, he said, I was like, why did we wait so long? This is the stupidest thing. So all I could tell you, Gil, when it feels right, do it. And it was just around that 2-month mark that the house was feeling empty. Like we'd gotten over losing Rue, and now we were feeling it's kind of weird not having a dog in the house. But we thought we'd wait until March so that we wouldn't, have to subject a new dog to terrible weather. And got him beginning of March after an 80-degree day in February. And 10 days after we got him, we got 14 inches of snow. And he just, Florida greyhound goes walking around like, I have no idea what this is. Why am I sinking? But,
how did you get him up from Florida?
Oh, the greyhound rescue group we work with, they bring in dogs from different.
Transport them?
Yeah, so they already had him in, and we were just looking through their list of dogs. And the idea was he looked the least like Rufus or Otis, and so we thought maybe we would compare less because he doesn't. But of course, you compare them. Neither of us having kids, Instead, we just treat our dogs like.
Well, I'm
like
married
children.
to an artist. That's like having 8 kids.
Yeah, it's true.
So, how's he doing?
He's fine. Hookworm thing he's had since the beginning. We've been dealing with that, but
is it hard to get rid of?
In this case, yeah, they're seeing that with a lot of the greyhounds from Florida. There's just this weird persistent strain that they're dealing with, which has given our vet something to do.
But he assimilated as a house dog?
Oh, yeah, instantly. It's the fun thing with greyhounds. The weird thing is he's just completely different than the other two. All these little traits that we just assumed were natural for greyhounds because of 8+ years walking these other two dogs around the block. This guy just didn't get at all. Still doesn't understand how to jump.
Which might be good depending on how high your fence is.
Oh yeah, we don't have a fence for partly for that reason. One of them we trusted in the backyard to run around in circles when I was out there. The other one I never would have let. And this guy, super prey drive. But trying to get him into the car, he can't figure out how to jump.
Oh.
He'll put his paws up. We'll put his paws up, and he'll start trying to drag himself up and in, but he can't actually.
We had folding steps for Darla.
Yeah, we're
her rear
looking at
didn't
doing
work
that.
real well.
This guy we assume can, because we've seen him run, but he hasn't figured out that he slinks up and down the stairs where the other guys used to bound and jump. So we think he just doesn't understand the power of his ass at this point. And being a greyhound, it's pretty powerful. Yeah,
Did he race?
Yeah, yeah. The nice thing, the funny thing with adopting one nowadays as opposed to 8 or 9 years ago, is that the videos of their races are all online.
Oh.
Back then they weren't. And so we got to actually watch this guy run. A few of them, he was ahead like Secretariat. He was a ridiculously good racer. But other ones around the first turn, like they would all be going around the oval to the left and he would just head off to the right and do his thing. And it was like, that's the dog I want. The one who can't even bother to figure out where every other dog is going.
You think they follow each other, but they're not really pack dogs, are they?
No, they'll all chase the same thing. And we had notes from our previous dogs' races where it would say things like collided on first turn and things like that. And now we understand, having watched some video of Bendico's races, that, sometimes they just, nope, not interested. I'm going to go do my thing over there instead. So, and that's, I guess.
Are there any health issues connected with racing? Is there arthritis or?
No, there's just the more they race, the more likely they've been chewed up and have little scars and cuts, and the more likely they are to have broken a limb or something at some point. But none of the guys we've had any injuries like that. So, although we've never understood or never learned how our first dog was missing just a piece of his tongue, maybe a quarter inch or quarter centimeter off the front. It was just this, we think because he was so food crazy that it was tied into him being so food crazy. But yeah.
Or another dog bit him.
Yeah. You get things like that where you just have no idea, but they can never really tell you, what the history is. So, were you a dog person growing up?
I wasn't allowed to have a dog, and I wanted one so badly. Yeah. They did eventually cave, and we had a cat for a long time.
That's a cheap substitute.
Not the same thing, but they didn't understand.
Yeah. It's a pet of some kind. Yeah.
It's funny and then at one point when we moved to this house, in fact, we had 7 dogs and 4 cats.
Jeez. Which I assume, did you have any sort of pet thing when you were in New York? I assume all that stuff was...
Drew and I had a cat named Shammy. That was a Himalayan, very sweet breed. And she was his mom's cat and lived with him. But
it was really getting out to Pennsylvania where you could...
Yeah, we had cats in the city, basically. And we brought them up here. Yeah.
Do they deal? Do they complain that there's not enough nightlife?
They didn't go out of the house either way, so it didn't really matter.
Well, but you made up for lost time. All the pets in the world. I'd say the house is kind of quiet.
It's ridiculous, and there's no one to take care of.
Yeah.
Especially when you have an old sick dog, your whole day is sort of centered around, what does she need now? Does she need to go out? Does she need this? Does she need? And it's funny because we drove over where the vet had been. And we were like, wow, we haven't been here in a long time. We used to be here. We were here all the time, every week.
The rhythms we get into with that stuff where you realize it's part of the... Well, in fact, Amy and I, even the walks we used to take with Rue and Otis, we kept doing them once they were gone. It was if we fall out of practice with this, we know we're going to get a dog at some point. But if we fall out of practice,
we do it too. We still go on the same hikes.
Yeah.
And it was really sad too, because what happened with Darla is she sort of lost the ability to walk. And it kind of came on slowly. And so she couldn't do this walk anymore or that walk anymore. And we would feel so guilty if we took the walk without her. It was terrible.
Well, we had it from the first dog we lost. Is the second one we got, Otis. Both our first 2 dogs were named after Groucho Marx characters, Rufus T. Firefly and Otis B. Driftwood. Otis died first. He had a osteosarcoma, which we got misdiagnosed. But all we knew was that he was limping, wasn't great. And so for the last couple of months, we were always doing shorter walks. And pretty much the moment he was gone, Rue started taking us on long walks again. He's like, yep, okay, we can finally get him. We think he never forgave us for bringing in a second dog anyway. He was our only dog for the first year. Then we brought in Otis. We think he resented that from day one. So he lasted another 15 months or so without him. But yeah, he took us on, we are going for long walks now, Dad.
My turn.
Yeah. And it's fun having something you could treat as a child, but not actually have to,
pay for college.
Right. That's pretty much the big one, I figure. Or art school, whatever. So what did you learn raising beagles? Or were you doing breeding, or is it just the raising and showing?
I did a tiny bit of breeding. Mm-hmm. I 2 litters. One I kept the puppy, and the other I sold 1 puppy from. I kept the others. Mm-hmm. So you learn a lot. You learn a lot about dogs, dog behavior, dog health, which is really important if you're a breeder, because you can test for just about anything now. They've developed so many health clearances and genetic tests that you need to be doing that if you're going to be breeding a dog. You need to be getting the tested. And if you go to the Canine Health Foundation website, if you're thinking about getting a particular breed of dog from a breeder, that website lists each test that particular breed should be tested for and cleared for. So you clear the parents so that you have healthy puppies. Mm-hmm. And that is a really important thing to know if you want to go to a breeder for a dog.
Yeah. And that's one of the things with greyhounds is that everything is about the lineage. Mm-hmm. If you go to any of their sites, you go to a greyhound database and they will list everyone, all the breeding generation after generation for them just because it's, racing oriented, which is kind of a weird trip.
Except people will do it for hunting orientations too. I mean, it's like who was the best hunter or whatever, but.
Yeah. But in our case, it tends to be Florida hillbillies and their racing thing. But anyway, sorry. Anything from that world applicable to dealings with human beings or artists?
Dog.
No.
Patience.
Care and well-treating.
Patience. Patience and a sense of humor.
Yeah, I figure that's number one. Now, actually, can you talk a little about Drew refers to you as his collaborator in his work. Can you talk a little about the role you play?
Cohabolaborator.
Yeah, that's a good one too. I like it. Sort of? Yeah,
well, it's so natural when you're living together in small premises in New York to just start bouncing ideas around. Mm-hmm. And there were so many places back then to put something. You could come up with something all by yourself and say, oh, I know who's going to want this. I'll put it here. And it was much easier back then. I don't know if you took a look at the Fun Never Stops.
Yeah.
That was just on and on and on, productivity, and there was a place for everything. There's nothing in there, I don't think, that didn't appear in print somewhere.
Yeah, it's one of the ongoing conversations about this show is just the way those markets have dried up, or what it means to have to find your own venue, which, again, Drew seems to have done with the paintings, the books, the gallery.
Which is nice because it coincided with exactly what he wanted to do at that time. Mm-hmm. When he started with the old Jewish comedians.
Let me ask in that respect, what's your background with that sort of milieu?
I guess mainly
you along for the ride? Or?
No, mainly my dad was a movie buff. Mm-hmm. So when we were kids, it would be like, if there was a W.C. Fields film on or a Marx Brothers film or so, I would be, sit down and watch this. We were kind of ordered to. Or, take us to the comedy movies that were out at the time. So Mad World and that type of thing. So we knew who everyone was. Or if there was a comic on Ed Sullivan, you watched the comic, you just, or even some of the daytime talk shows had good comedians on. The Mike Douglas show up in Philly. And Merv Griffin, they would have good comics on. So I kind of knew who everybody was. Yeah,
I sort of wondered that about the two of you, whether you sort of adopted his bizarre interests or if you shared enough of them that's why you connected to begin with.
We coincide with a lot of different things.
Yeah.
A lot. Menashe Skolnick, not so much. I hadn't really been a fan before.
Yeah, have you turned him on to weird aspects of culture? Or any, I know you've never mentioned this artist or this writer or this comedian, but this is somebody I adore.
Maybe some movies, because we're both really into old movies, but I knew different ones than he knew. So you remember Theater 80 in New York and Bleecker Theater, and I was members to those. So, you'd pay a membership dues and then you'd get in for like $2. So like every Saturday and Sunday, basically you'd go to the movies.
Yeah.
So we would say, he would say, oh, I want you to see this one. And I would say, oh, no, I want you to see this one, like Designed for Living. Mm-hmm. Noel Coward and that type of thing, something that he might not have been aware of as he was watching Sammy Petrillo. I know, I promised I wasn't going to.
You have to throw a Sammy Petrillo reference into any conversation involving Drew. That's For the record, it was the first conversation with Drew where he brought him up, and I was just drawing a blank at the time because I did not have
Sammy
all of that.
Petrillo, I do only know from Drew.
Yeah,
I did
as
not,
one should,
And I may I confess, I leave the room when he puts on Terry Petrillo.
Again, the idea that, as he put it, someone can make a living as a Jerry Lewis impersonator seems a little far-fetched nowadays.
I leave the room and then I'm like, I can still hear it.
Yeah, it's okay, Drew. That's fine.
I can still hear that.
Your favorite guest at the great reception for the old Jewish comedians party? If you had to choose among Gilbert, Abe Vigoda, Robert Klein,
Larry Storch?
Larry Storch. I didn't get to meet Larry. He showed up later because I left early.
So I had to go up to Larry and say,
"Was that your number one?"
Who says I'm dumb? He says, "You remember that?" I had a crush on Agarn when I was a little girl. So.
Yeah. It was trying to tell my wife that Larry Storch had a career beyond F Troop, because we really didn't encounter anything else of his over the years. And you realize, that guy's still been going all these decades and had a career before that. So got to be 95, 96 years old at this point.
He's around 96 now, I think.
Yeah. That'd make for a great guest on the show.
He stands on his head every day, every morning.
If that's what keeps you going, that's fine. You know? All I've got is I walk a dog around the block, or I walk myself around the block. No, my brother can. He does yoga, and that's fine by him. But now, have you thought of besides the Sister Writer Eaters piece, have you been working on writing?
I'm
have
always
projects
writing. I still write poetry, and I just wrote a story, but there are very few places to put things.
It's a weird trip because people will tell you should just publish it, whatever online thing, but that's not actually publishing.
So somebody can steal it.
Yeah. What sort of writing? What do you...
I just wrote a story, very short story. I was kind of going for a creepier feeling, but it kind of has a humorous twist as well. And I always write poetry. Mm-hmm. So not every day. But.
Are there contemporary poets you read?
Contemporary poets, no, but there are some contemporary authors that I do read, which I thought might surprise you, considering what my bookshelves look like.
Well, you had the classic shelves over on the one side, but you had the more contemporary ones over here.
You're good.
Largely because I just coincidentally took out, and this isn't even contemporary because he's been dead for a couple of years, The Pugilist at Rest. Mm. I actually was going to grab a quote from that for the weekly email that I send out. But I ended up grabbing something else. But I was rereading that short story a couple of weeks ago and thought, it's nice. Somebody else has the one book that I do. Oh, well, you got the Robert Caro and everything else also. So we overlap in a lot of bookshelf space.
Also love Julian Barnes.
I've only read a few pieces of, and I want to, at some point I want to, because I've got Clive James under my belt, and we lost Chris Hitchens already, get Barnes, Martin Amis, and Rushdie is the other one in that general social set. Although just yesterday I was pitching Tom Stoppard for the English, the UK trip that I'm doing this fall with the hope of...
if you want to start with Julian Barnes, read Nothing to be Frightened of. It's about fear of death, and it's one of the funniest books I've ever read.
Yeah?
Yeah. And I like Jennifer Egan, I like Alison Burnett, and Merrill Markoe. As you see, I have her books. And Tom Leopold.
I know his name.
He was a TV writer for Cheers, and he has some novels that are very enjoyable.
And I think Drew has suggested I talk to him at some point. That's He thinks
talk to.
He thinks I have more pull than I do sometimes. And Drew's like, "Oh, you need to talk to this guy and this guy." I'm like, "Not sure they're going to return my calls, but yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot." So, do you harbor visions of publishing? Do you think of?
It would certainly be nice.
Yeah. I mean, do you work at it at all? Do you submit, or is it pretty much still kind of working on this piece and that piece? I know there aren't a whole lot of...
actually thinking of possibly submitting some things to the American Bystander. Are you aware of that magazine?
Oh yeah. I've interviewed at least 6 or 7 of the contributors, and I've been in touch with one of the publisher, Michael Gerber. We've had a nice correspondence for a while.
The last issue, it was just enjoyable from beginning to end.
Yeah.
It's really...
he just put out word, the new one. I think new one's going to press.
Number 5, right? Yeah.
So, that's the funny thing when I went to record with Patrick McDonnell was that he heard me talking about the American Bystander on a previous episode, and I knew nothing about the history of the American Bystander. So he had a humor newspaper that was the American Bystander from like the early 80s that he contributed to. He had a piece in or something. I think it was like a trial issue that he'd wanted to.
Right. It's been around for a really long time as a concept.
Yeah, I had no idea. And he's like, well, actually, I have this. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't understand this existed before. Took a picture, sent it to Michael, who laughed that, it was all tying together for me. But yeah, seeing the somebody try to do print humor in this day and age, I will.
It's amazing. It's a relief.
Yeah, I'll support that.
To see it back exactly
every time. If you're talking to a guy who will spend a Saturdays driving out to sit down and have a conversation, and not bother transcribing it and making it a searchable text thing. So if somebody is going to do something that you can only get in print, has some of the funniest people in the world, and makes it.
And I think that's how the writers and artists feel too. Yeah. It's like, thank God this is here.
Yeah. Yeah. No idea what it pays, which you can find out if you submit something. Let me know. But but it's just the fact.
Fluctuate.
I would assume, but the fact that it's out there, that's
like a miracle.
I'm all for Quixotic gestures.
But then I heard that they were starting to press vinyl again, and Sony's pressing vinyl records again.
Well, that's a weird trip. Now, the vinyl thing, my take on that is there's a hipster aspect to it that drives a chunk of the market. Yeah, there's the audiophile side where it's, greater fidelity, blah, blah, blah. But I think there's also the hip, I'm going to have vinyl because nobody else has vinyl, and which all works until you have to move for the first time. And then you realize, holy shit, I've got 10 tons of this fucking stuff. Why don't I just put this all on the cloud and stream this onto my goddamn phone? Oh. And that's, I think, when all the vinyl fetishists get into their 30s.
So do you think it's like a lashback at technology there?
There is an analog thing. There is I'm going to push back on everything being streaming. And the audio quality of streaming sucks. Although I was just reading a week or two ago that a lot of the vinyl pressings also suck because they come from masters that are basically just a CD, which was not high quality. Only because one of my favorite musicians, she and her partner bought like a lathe to do their own masters off of analog tape and then have that pressed because that's how you get good audio. They actually bought the stock of some European label that put out a vinyl of one of their records because it was based on a shitty CD copy. And they're like, we'll pay you for the 500 copies just to get them off the market because we don't want that existing.
Right.
So yeah, I think there is an analog
thing. Does anybody know how
thing.
Neil Young feels about this?
Yeah. All he's going to do is complain and try and get us to buy more, strange formatted material. But, and again, this thing falls into that also. Like, this is a long conversation that there's no, there's no quick bullet points as to what we talk about. There's no transcript of the whole thing. It requires time and a level of interest. Similarly, reading, I'll still read on a Kindle because of travel. I can't cart around, but I retain more from print,
I tried to read a friend's book on my iPad, and I just couldn't. I said, I'll wait for the printed copy. Yeah. I can't read it.
Yes.
Does the light hurt your eyes after? I mean, I could sit and read a Kindle, book for 8 hours.
The Kindle has a different lighting system. Like an iPad is lit. The screen works in a way that will tire your eyes out. The higher end Kindles are made in a way that you can actually keep reading and reading. But it's just the spatial relation of a book that you miss. The holding a book in your hand and understanding, I've got, 10 pages left in this chapter. Or, I'm almost at the end.
That's true, too.
Yeah. It was a weird one. I was reading an Elmore Leonard book that I didn't realize the Kindle version had like 10 tons of additional stuff at the end. So the percentage I was going along saying you're at the 70% mark. I'm like, Jesus, this is like the climactic scene. What the hell are they going to do for another, X? And it ended. And the next thing was like an interview with Elmore Leonard. And that's like, okay, it's over.
Extras like a DVD.
Yeah. But if you were watching the movie and it said it was 4 hours long, but it turned out it was only, 2 hours and the rest of it was bonus, you would wonder what the hell was going to happen.
That actually just happened to us because we had a documentary we were going to watch, and Andrew said, I think it's an hour and a half long, but wait a minute, it says they're extras. How long is the movie? And I said, we just have to watch it through and see how long it is because we can't figure it out.
And was it a throwback to Little Rascals, Red Skelton, or anything else that was?
Actually, it was about Joe Sotomayor, the guy who used to make commercials.
Oh, yeah. I know him. Or JJ?
JJ's father.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that was because I'm of the now.
It's a fun documentary.
I'll have to look it up. So, artist or writer in the 80s when you were in New York that you wish you could have met with?
I actually, when I worked for the Frame Place, met some very interesting artists. James Rosenquist was one of them.
And then?
Writers that I wish I could meet.
I mean, there's the big...
Dead or alive.
Well, back in the 80s when you were in the city, I mean, there's the big mailer ones and all that, although Drew's dad has the...
I think I'd be afraid.
Yeah, Drew's dad has a story of fighting Norman Mailer at a party, which is a hoot.
Didn't he bite him?
Yeah.
Mailer bit him in the arm?
Because Bruce J. Friedman was twice the size of Norman Mailer, and that's, not going to go well for anybody.
Big and handsome doesn't always work.
But in that writing circles, or were there people you sort of idolized in that 80s New York world?
I used to go to those. Remember the poetry readings?
You act like I know all this stuff, but I'm a youngin', and I was living out in the woods.
I keep forgetting you're a mere child.
Yeah, the gray hair gives it more of a mature sheen.
I used to go to the poetry readings and do those, and that was really interesting because somebody would. Sometimes it was excruciating, and other times there would be somebody there. You'd be like, oh, that's really good.
Do you have a defense mechanism for when somebody asks you to read their stuff on the spot? Oh, you should read this thing I wrote. Is that because I still have to fight ways of just telling them, no, I should read this.
I was on a bus one time from New York City to mid-Pennsylvania, a town to visit a friend. And the guy next to me started up a conversation. And I told him I had been writing poetry and had been published, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, oh, he was a poet too. He says, would you read my latest poem? So I said, all right. I'm like a 19-liner type of writer. Yeah.
It's my 3,000-word biographical poem of...
his suitcase and pulls out like 2 telephone books, thick, poem. And he plops it on my lap. I mean, we're there for 2.5 hours, right? I guess he figured. Make a nice impression. I just flipped thumbed through it and went, needs editing.
Yeah.
Gave it back to him.
I'm going to go find another bus now. Yeah, it's a long-standing, no, I can't read.
Well, my thing with people, with writing is, I think if you write something and you think it's not that good, you should throw it away, which I've done with most of the things I've written.
Yeah.
And if you write something and you think it's really, really good, you should throw half of it away.
Yeah. So, at what point did you learn how to kill your babies? At what point did you get over the...
You have to go, when you write something and you're all excited and you're all still, it's all flowing and everything, and you have to go back later and read it cold and then decide if it really works. Did you really get the point across? Did you really make it beautiful or funny or whatever?
And you thought of collaborating on a book of poetry with Drew's old liver-spotted people illustrated in it? Or
I had an idea to do a small book because I haven't written that many that are that great, and had various artists that I know illustrate them. Because years ago, Stephen Croninger illustrated a bunch of my poems. I could show you those. I have them.
Oh, great.
And it was really amazing because there was this one poem where I had thrown out an image of a guy looking through an empty mirror frame. It wasn't working, and I just threw it out. And that's what he drew. So somehow I had put that image in his head without ever describing it in the piece. And that blew me away. And so many times I'll have a concept that I'll work out with Drew, and when he shows it to me, it'll be like exactly the same thing, but flipped. Something like that. And it's weird how you can communicate something in a few words that people just instantly assimilate.
Do you find a female-male sensibility gap at all in terms of expressing anything artistically, or is it really...
I never think that way.
Yeah.
You know, I remember being somewhere and with a bunch of guys, and the guy says, you know, you're the only girl here. And I said, I would have never noticed that if you hadn't pointed it out. I just don't think that way. Mm-hmm. I don't know what female sensibility as opposed to male sensibility is.
Cool. Yeah, I've never, the show is always about 2-to-1, male to female. And when I was pressed on it once, I said, well, you know, the sad truth is, of course, you know, women aren't interesting to talk to. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the real truth is you just screw up and you fall into a cocoon of people you know, right. And just, yeah.
I hope that no one recognizes themselves in this story, but I was once at dinner and with 3 or 4 other couples, and the last couple to arrive, the gentleman looked at the table of us and said, whoa, so are we going to rearrange this so all the guys are on one side and all the women are on the other side? And the women started to pull back their chairs. And I said, how would you like it if I walked into the room and said, I'm not interested in anything you have to say for the rest of the evening?
So you don't have what I have, you're over there, you get to, yeah, that's. So Drew's work is largely about looking back. In time, do you feel you have more contemporary sensibility? I know you talk about the same watching TCM movies and looking back, but
well,
you know, do you have a certain...
his work now.
Yeah.
If you go through the older books, a lot of it is about. Well, we did so much work for Entertainment Weekly.
True, that was contemporary.
It would be about contemporary TV or contemporary politics, or he did the famous cover of the New Yorker of Obama on his inauguration. Yeah. So he used to do, when he did more editorial things, that was all contemporary. But I think now he likes to focus on what is timeless, not things that people will say, well, you know, who was Jack Abramoff? People don't remember that anymore. But, you know, we did comics about him back then. So I think now he thinks the things that resonate with him are things that are timeless, that if you don't know about it, you should.
And you? Do you find your perspective looking forward?
Given the literature that I read and everything, I do like old things. I like old houses, old books, old paintings. I guess I am more old-fashioned than I am contemporary, for sure.
Nothing wrong with that. It's,
you note that the shelves over here are much smaller than the shelves over here.
Yes, you got the classic ones on the larger. I was wondering in terms of, you know, are there other hidden bookshelves around, or is this pretty much the, you know...
Yeah, other than the things people borrowed and never gave back. That's
I keep stacks of those, actually. I was going to bring a book for you. I'll mail it over instead, but, you know, it was a book and a pie, and I figured I'd go with the pie as a nice gift first.
You can't eat a book.
If desperate, you can, but, you know.
But you said classic, and I think he feels his people, those people that he draws, are the classics, too. Yeah. And that's what is lasting through time. That's why it's a classic. And he's doing more what he really wants to do now, anyway.
Mm-hmm. And you?
Pretty much do what I want.
I think it's a good way to operate. Kathy, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Gil.
And that was Kathy Bidus. She doesn't have a website, but she is on Facebook if you want to look her up. That's Bidus. Now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever heard it pronounced, so I'm hoping it's Bidus and not Bidus. I'm sure she'll give me an earful if I have the wrong pronunciation. But she's a contributor to the new collection Sister Writer Eaters from Griffith Moon, which has a ton of great essays and great recipes from fun writers like Kathy. You should also check out her husband's blog at drewfriedman.blogspot.com, as well as his art prints page, drewfriedman.net, because he sometimes refers to her, and she's a contributor to a lot of his humor pieces. And that's DREWFRIEDMAN. After we wrapped up, I asked Kathy, so, who are you reading? If you want to hear her answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. You can get access by supporting the show at patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that bonus podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, series of ebooks, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod, support the art of fine conversation. Now, I recorded this one at Kathy and Drew's house in Pennsylvania. Tolls were like $1 or $2, so otherwise it was just gas money and my Saturday. I did get to go out to lunch with the two of them after, which was a lot of fun. So if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories show, like web hosting, travel, and equipment, or just toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. Make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to Kevin Katila, John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Stephen Nadler, Wallace Wilde Manozzi, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, Jack Les Camella, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We've got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Now, our music for this episode, as ever, is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. And that's it for this week's Virtual Memories show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with return guests John Clute and Liz Hand, recorded at ReaderCon last July. Till next time, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store or at soundcloud.com/VMSpod. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. Or if you like to stare at a screen of a static picture of a book cover, go to YouTube and search for Virtual Memories Show, and you'll find past episodes. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show in the store, and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. Till next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.